Okay, I'm back. Let's jump right into the next section of Schaefer-Landau's chapter on natural law, chapter 6. And in this video, we'll also connect it to some passages from St. Thomas Aquinas in the Ethical Life. Okay, so this is where we ended up last time. If morality has its basis in a conception of human nature, right? If morality derives in some way from our nature as human beings, then we better be able to define what we mean by human nature. Right? If the right thing to do is what is natural to the human, well, then that requires a definition of what is natural to the human. Okay. So he considers, Schaefer-Landau considers, three different ways of thinking about human nature that would be relevant to natural law theory, or relevant to the task or the project of trying to explain morality in terms of human nature. So on the one hand, we could say that human nature is animal nature, that they are one and the same. We are animals by nature, and so if we want to understand what is natural to the human, we look to our animal nature, right? Maybe contrasted with our social nature, right? We look to our innate instinctual tendencies as human beings, before we were corrupted by civilization. So what are we? Basically, we are animals who need protection. We need food. Right, so we begin sort of with basic animal needs and try to draw out a view about morality in relationship to our basic animal nature. So what is right to do is what is natural to the human animal. Well, there's a problem with this way of thinking about human nature if we're trying to derive morality from it. So, for example, he points to the fact that we are meat eaters. We eat other animals. Now, first of all, this is something that most of the animals we eat are not themselves animal eaters or meat eaters, but there are other animals in nature who eat meat. We are not the only ones. But the fact that an animal kills and eats another animal does not give us moral license to do the same. Right? This is an argument he made in the introduction. Some animals kill their own young, others brutalize the weaker members of their species. It doesn't make it right for us to do these things. So if we're trying to derive morality from what belongs to us instinctually in our animal nature, then it seems like it is natural for at least some animals to kill their young, right, to brutalize weaker members of the species. And so if that's what we mean by human nature, right, just act according to your animal nature, well, that doesn't seem to accord with our moral intuitions that it's wrong to do those things. So that doesn't seem to be the conception of human nature that we need in order to derive morality from it. That's a problem. So it looks like we need to define human nature differently. Right? It's not just in terms of our animal nature. Right? Acting naturally, acting morally is not the same as acting as the other animals act. Okay, so, well, maybe we can define human nature as what is innate, right, in terms of some innate traits that we have from birth. What's inborn to us, and this also kind of relates to the difference between the human being in its natural form and the human being in its artificial or civilized form. So Rousseau is an example of a philosopher who thought that we were by nature good. Right? Society corrupts us. It's in our nature to be pleasant, cooperative, considerate of one another. And so once we enter civil society, we become unpleasant, we become uncooperative, we become less considerate of each other. So from Rousseau's point of view, right, in order to understand human nature, we have to go back to our innate traits before we were corrupted by society. And from Rousseau's point of view, right, that gives us the basis for a moral view. We should act according to our basic nature before we were corrupted by society. However, it's not clear that Rousseau is right about that. So Thomas Hobbes, who we talked about when we were looking at egoism, did not think that we are innately pleasant and cooperative and considerate of each other, Hobbes thought that in a state of nature we were selfish, competitive, and distrustful, and that civilization in some ways corrects for that selfish nature and makes us more cooperative with each other. Right? So Hobbes had a very different view of our innate nature. So the problem is two different philosophers have very different views about what our innate nature is. And, so what belongs to us by nature, and what belongs, what we acquire through nurture or through education. And so if that's how we define human nature in terms of what's innate to us, we need to sort of be able to defend one or other of the views, like Rousseau's view or Hobbes' view, okay? And so depending upon which view we defend, we'll have a very different conception of like what it means to act according to our innate nature. Right? So if we're defending this Hobbes view, then we should act selfishly, right? Because that's what we are innately, right, built to do. Whereas from Rousseau's point of view, we should act more considerately of each other because that's what belongs to our innate nature. So we need to resolve that kind of debate. And it's not clear that that's an easily resolvable debate. But he says whether we resolve that debate or not, right? What belongs to our nature and what is a result of our socialization into the civilized world, right? Even if we resolve that debate, as Schaefer-Landau points out, the origins of our impulses are irrelevant to the morality of our actions. So even if we could establish with Hobbes that we are innately inclined to harm each other in a state of nature, that wouldn't make it moral. Right? We could still give an argument against certain actions, robbery, for example, even if we are innately inclined to commit those crimes in a state of nature. And by the same token, even if we were not born with a desire to help other people, or we weren't born with an altruistic tendency, still we'd say that cheerfully comforting the sick is a good thing. Right? Helping other people is a good thing, even if it's not built into us innately. So it seems like we have a way of assessing the morality of our actions that's independent of the question of like what is innate to us, what is our innate nature. So it doesn't look like innateness is a good way to define human nature, because it doesn't yield a kind of a clear conclusion about what is moral and immoral. Right? We can't derive morality from a conception of innateness. So then the third idea that he considers, the third way of defining human nature, is just in terms of what human beings have in common. Right? So the natural thing is not what is innate to us, and it is not what belongs to our, what the other animals do. Right? That's not what natural means, not what the other animals do, also not what is innate to us, but what humans have in common. Right? What is shared by all human beings? What traits and qualities are shared by all human beings? And that would be a way of defining what human nature is. And so then we could derive morality from a description of what all human beings have in common, right? The essence of humanity. But so what are the problems with this view? Well, maybe there are no universal human traits. That's one problem. And secondly, even if there are, they might not provide very good guidance, right? This might not be a good way of determining whether we're acting rightly or wrongly, right? So, he thinks about these two problems, right? Well, first of all, right, don't we have some universal traits? Like we all want food, we all want to drink water, we all have a sex drive. Okay. But, right, we can always come up with an exception. Okay, we can always come up with an exception. Sorry, my phone just rang. We can always come up with an exception to these rules, right? And so like whatever trait we come up with as like to put on the list of universal traits, we can give an example of someone who lacks that. Now, the natural law theorist who wants to defend their view that human nature is defined as what all human beings have in common can say, can look at an example like, it makes sense to say that it belongs to the nature of the buck or the male deer to be alert to predators, have 4 legs, to grow antlers, be fawn-colored. Still, we can find examples of bucks with only 3 legs. And you might say, well, that means they're not really bucks because bucks have 4 legs. So this is a 3-legged buck is not really a buck. But right, that's a problem that we don't talk that way. So we might adopt a different strategy, right? Perhaps human nature, like that of non-human animals, is determined not by what every member of the species shares, but only by what most members share. Okay, so this is what the natural law theorist will try to say here, that the traits that humans have in common, it's not that every member of the species has it, but most members have it. Okay? And so the same will go for human beings. Of course, we can find examples of human beings who don't have one of these traits, but right, the view is that what is natural is what most human beings have in common. Okay, so that's a way of resolving the problem, but as Schaefer-Landau says, it hides the real problem. It seems like the fact that most human beings, even if it's not all human beings, that most human beings have a certain trait doesn't seem relevant to the question of whether they're acting morally or not, right? So suppose, as he says, that most of us turn out to be selfish and mean-spirited. Maybe that is what is natural in the sense most common to most members of the species, that we are selfish and mean. So then it would follow, if we're defining human nature that way, and we're thinking that morality derives from it, it would follow that being selfish and mean is moral. Okay, so maybe you want to accept that view, but from Schaefer-Landau's view, that's not a view that we have to accept. And like, if we could find a way of explaining the origin of morality that doesn't lead to the conclusion that selfishness and meanness are morally correct, then we should opt for that view. So again, he thinks this is a reason to think that this third conception of human nature doesn't go anywhere as an explanation of the origin of morality or the source of morality. So even if everyone were cruel and malicious, that wouldn't make cruelty and malice morally good, he thinks, which just is another way of showing that this conception of human nature doesn't explain our moral intuitions. Okay, all right, so that leaves then one final conception of human nature that he considers, and this is really what Thomas Aquinas develops. And this is what I'll talk about in the final video. The idea that our nature is defined in terms of our purpose as human beings, okay? And so the good life is the one that fulfills our true purpose, right? Or right action is an action that accords with our purpose or our functioning, our proper functioning as human beings. Okay, so here's a different conception of human nature, right? We're not thinking of human nature in terms of animal nature, in terms of what the other animals do. It's not understood in terms of what is innate to the human, because that's a complicated concept, and also it doesn't seem relevant to the morality of our actions. It's also not human nature in the sense what is common to all or most human beings, but human nature in the sense, what is our purpose, or what is our function, right? What is our proper functioning? And that's the idea that Thomas Aquinas develops. Okay, so we'll look at that in the last video.